Alright, here we are for stop number 2, pit stop A. Our notes today are going to be on page 6. Okay, that should be a left side page right after your periodic table. And our title is Density Formula. Now, we mentioned before how all of stop number 2 is going to be about density, and that's a lot of math calculations. And so in science, when we have math calculations, we're typically following a formula. So we're going to introduce that in this pit stop, and then the next set of notes in pit stop B, we'll actually do some practice calculating density problems. So first, let's talk about what density really is. Density is the relationship between the mass of an object or a substance and the volume of that object or substance. So we're looking at mass compared to volume. Remember, mass is how much matter, and volume is how much space it takes up. So we're going to define density as the amount of matter in a given space. So another way to think about that is how much mass is in a certain volume. Okay, it's the relationship of mass to volume. And so to help us remember this formula and to study this formula, we're going to use a heart shape. So you should have a pink sheet of paper that has kind of like the outline of a heart. Okay, go ahead and cut that out on the dotted lines. And it does not have to be perfect. We're actually going to make this our inside, so it's okay if it's not perfectly on the lines. Okay, to cut out that piece in the middle, you fold it in half. Okay, so it kind of makes the top of your heart flat. And then you can cut along these dotted lines to give you the top shape of the heart. And then if you want to hide the lines, just open it up and fold it the other way. And do mine like that. Okay. We're actually going to use this shape, the curved shape at the top and the pointed shape at the bottom, to help us remember that formula. Okay. So if you want to go ahead and glue it down right about here on your page. Okay, so our formula that we're going to use, and you're going to use this for, is D equals M over V. Okay, so do you see how our letters kind of took the shape of the heart, right? D is going to stand for density, M is going to stand for mass, and V is going to stand for volume. And this line, it kind of looks like a fraction, but ultimately what that means is divided by. So I'm going to write that right here. Divided by. So if we were to read that formula, we would say that density equals mass divided by volume. Okay. Now I know back in Unit 1 we did talk about mass and volume separately, but I would like to go ahead and add some information here. Okay, so if you open up the heart, we're going to draw that dividing line again. Alright, at the top of the heart we're going to talk about mass. Okay, remember that we said that mass is essentially the amount of matter in an object. Okay, the amount of matter. When we measure mass, we are using grams, and typically we abbreviate that with a lowercase g. Okay, if it's a larger object, we can use kilograms, or a smaller object, it could be milligrams, but mostly when we're using density, we're just going to see the unit of grams for mass. Okay, and if you remember when we were measuring mass, This is when we use the scale or the triple beam balance. I'm going to write TBB for triple beam balance. Okay. Now remember, volume is what goes on the bottom. Okay. And I'm actually going to divide this into two sections, because if you remember in Unit 1 when we talked about volume, volume is a little bit different if we're measuring the volume of a solid versus measuring the volume of a liquid. Okay. So if we're measuring the volume of a solid object, okay, when we're measuring solid volume, remember, if it's a regular shaped object, we're going to use the formula length times width times height. Okay, and if typically we're measuring length in centimeters, so if we're taking a centimeter value times another centimeter value times another centimeter value, we end up with centimeters cubed. Okay, so that's going to be the unit for our solid volume when we're talking about density. Now, if we're looking at a liquid, remember, liquid's a little bit different. We can't take the length and the width and the height, right? Usually we use the graduated cylinder, and we measure in milliliters. Okay, it's very important to know the units that we're using for mass and volume, because that's what's going to determine our units for density. Okay, so down here towards the bottom, we're going to write our density units. And so, if it's going to be a little bit different if we're talking about a solid object versus a liquid object. Okay, since we are dividing, and we can use this line like this, or we can use a slash, like a backward slash line, to represent the divided by. The unit for a solid is grams per centimeter cubed. Okay, so again, what we did was we took the mass units divided by the volume units, okay, for a solid. So this is for a solid object. Grams per centimeter cubed. Or, if we're talking about a liquid, okay, it would be grams per milliliter. That's G/ml. Okay. So here are units when we're measuring density. Every answer that you calculate in density should have one of these units or labels right after your answer. Grams per centimeter cubed if it's a solid, and grams per milliliter if it's a liquid.